Hey everyone, and welcome to Risky Business. My name's Patrick Gray. We'll be chatting with Adam Boileau about all of the week's security news in just a moment, and then we'll be hearing from this week's sponsor. And this week we are chatting with Haroon Mir in the sponsor segment. He is, of course, the founder and head honcho over at Thinkst Canary. And he'll be joining us to talk about, Thinkst Canary's /security page, where they sort of spell out how they think about security and the sort of security measures that they use to ensure that their product is sensible. And Haroon's along basically to ask other vendors, where's yours? Where's your equivalent to Thinkst /security page, which he thinks is kind of table stakes, and I kind of agree with him. So that's an interesting conversation coming up a little bit later on. But Adam, let's get into the news now. And look, it's a bad week to be someone who operates a scam compound in Myanmar.
Yes, we've seen reports that the notorious KK Park scam compound in Myanmar, at least some of the buildings there have been blown up with dynamite. We have some pictures of, like clouds of dust and smoke rising from the facility. Local reporting is a little mixed. The KK Park and a number of the other scam compounds in the region kind of operate either directly with or under the kind of protection of the local, military junta. And there's a reasonable kind of set of reporting which says, this is just performative and that the relevant people were escorted out of the building safely to be established in other places whilst they blew up some, buildings for the cameras. But, even if that's the case, there is definitely a lot of focus on these scam compounds. They have gotten too big to really kind of continue as they were, and there absolutely is going to be pressure from the outside. But either way, it's kind of nice to see,
Yeah, so I went down a bit of a Wikipedia rabbit hole trying to untangle bits and pieces of this, right? And it gets complicated because I don't think it was actually the junta itself that was operating these scam compounds. I think it was actually like a militia, a Buddhist militia, the Karen National Army or whatever, and now it's the junta who's blowing bits and pieces of it up. I mean, one thing that I predicted like a couple of years ago was eventually we would see various armed factions competing to control this industry, given how valuable it is. We don't know that that's what's happening here, but I don't know who's blowing it up, who was controlling it, who was profiting, or why. But as you point out, the KK Park compound is a big one. I think there's something like 250 buildings there and they've blown up 25 of them. So, what this means, who can say? But we can say that China has sentenced another 5 Myanmar scam compound kingpins to be executed, which we have seen before from China. We spoke about that a few weeks ago, about how I happened to be camping when the first news of that released. I was very surprised when I sort of stumbled on it later, but it looks like this is China's approach to people who run scam compounds in Myanmar.
Yeah, and this is certainly a bit more meaningful than blowing up a few buildings, and some of the crime families that are, the ones who were sentenced previously and this round as well, they are quite big organizations and, also like they're Chinese operations, like the Chinese crime families operating inside China or near China, and the Chinese authorities cracking down on them. So there's kind of a saying, I think, in China that, when you're outside China, the people you can least trust are other Chinese because they're going to rip you off. And that seems to be kind of the thing that the Chinese government are cracking down on here, right? Is that their own people essentially ripping off Chinese people. And the fact that they're doing it from outside China complicates a little bit. But we've seen, the Chinese military and police cross the border to go pick people up or assist with raids or whatever else. Like, they seem pretty serious about cracking down on this. And honestly, sentencing people to death does send a pretty clear message to the others, right?
Yeah, and I think there's that thing, and it's an odd, complex sort of political thing. But, because the Chinese do run an authoritarian state, but they have this sort of historical communist thing about slavery. You know what I mean? About the exploitation of people for this sort of activity is something that is so offensive to Chinese communist ideology that I'm not surprised that these guys are getting lined up against the wall and sort of taken care of, right? Like, that is just... Do you sort of see where I'm coming from with that?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And,
the only thing that would make it worse from a Chinese Communist Party perspective as if there were religion involved. You know, as if they were religious cults that were also exploiting people for commercial gains. Then it was like they'd kill them twice, you know.
Yes, they would. Oh dear. Well, I guess the good thing is the scale of the scam industry has gotten some attention, and we've seen it, you know, in Myanmar, we've seen it around Thailand, Cambodia, and Laos, Vietnam, like that whole region. There is definitely this kind of feeling that, you know, this has gotten too big, and they're each kind of exploring their own ways to deal with it. And good job, China, for once.
I mean, the whole thing feels a little bit Trumpy, I think, in the the way it's like, you know, the way they're hitting like alleged drug boats and stuff in the Caribbean. It's like, yeah, right, okay. So we got to the point where there's dynamite involved and executions and stuff, and right, okay. So
2025 is not really the year of nuance, is it?
No, it's certainly not. Speaking of, and staying with you know, cyber scams in Singapore, scammers and mules, money mules, are going to be sentenced to between 6 and 24 strokes each, which sounds pleasant until you realise they're talking about strokes from a cane.
Yeah.
They're not going to just gently stroke them. They're gonna lash them with a cane. And these Singaporean like cane dudes take it pretty seriously.
They do, yeah. They really like the cane in Singapore, you know, one of the things that came out of this, so there's been existing laws around, you know, caning as a punishment, and they've kind of overhauled the levels and places where there's like mandatory caning, discretionary caning, you know, depending on the particular case or whatever else, and the amount of lashes that you get. One of the other stats that came out of this is that 60% of reported crimes in Singapore are scams, which I thought was a really interesting number. I mean, you know, Singapore is a famously quite safe place because of the strictness of their laws, and, you know, it's a very small country, so they do have to kind of run a pretty tight ship to keep things civil. But 60% was quite a big number. And so,
do you think it's because of the strict laws? I don't know, man. I think that Singapore's probably got some other things going for it that make turning to a life of crime not such a, you know.
I mean, yes, I'm sure there are a number of factors, but I mean, you know, you get on the train in Singapore on the you know, on the metro, the subway thing, and like there is no chewing gum on the seats of that train, unlike every other country in the world, because if you stick chewing gum on the train, you're also going to get caned. You know, it does provide some, you know, compels people to behave themselves. But yeah, there's a number of offences, you know, things like running scams themselves, money muling. There's also things like supporting them with like registering SIM cards or providing like other services to scammers, which may also see you like discretionarily caned if they decide you're a bad person. But yeah, I guess the moral of the story is Singapore probably not the place to do it. China is certainly not the place to do it. And the other places, you know, a little bit getting more dicey by the day.
Yeah, it's funny, you know, I knew a few of the Australian Federal Police guys who worked on the Bali bombing case. The Bali bombing, of course, happened back in 2002 and killed a bunch of Australians, so the Australian Federal Police offered support. It was really interesting talking to them about the Southeast Asian approach to law enforcement, especially when they're combating something that they take seriously, you know. So they had a number of laws that actually were very useful, according to the AFP, because a lot of those guys, they wound up going from those sort of tasks, and a bunch of them sort of wound up in the cyber part of AFP, which is how I knew them. And yeah, many an interesting conversation over beer, actually. It was interesting because they said the laws that enabled them to detain people for, you know, a few days and sort of sweat them a bit were actually quite helpful in solving that crime quite quickly. But other things they did, the Australians were like, whoa, hey, take it easy, you know. I think during the search for one of the bomb makers, a guy I know in the AFP was shown a video of where they thought he was in this hut and they just lit the hut up. And I mean, like, machine gun fire, mortars, everything. Didn't even say, hey, come out, like, just lit it up. And the AFP guys were like, yeah, that's not quite how we do things, but, you know, you do you. So I feel like, you know, once the wheels of justice start moving in Asia, yeah, they certainly do grind inexorably towards an outcome. Let's put it that way. All right, so staying with Asia, and there has been a breach of a Chinese cybersecurity firm called KnownSec. What do we know about this one? Because it does not appear to be of the same stripe as the iSoon leaks, where they were doing a lot of hacking and, you know, trying to sell stolen material to the Chinese government and whatnot. This seems like a more professional and less Yahoo kind of outfit. Like, what do we know here?
Yeah, so this is, they're a subsidiary of Tencent, and they are a pretty kind of like full service, cybersecurity company. There's a tranche of documents that were leaked on GitHub. They've subsequently been pulled, so I haven't seen the full set. And a few people have started analysing. Obviously, they're all in Chinese, so that's makes it more complicated for Western analysts. But we've got a few write-ups of some of the documents that people have seen, and it's not quite ISOOM level. Like this is a crowd that's running an APT or anything. Like this is more. There's a bunch of InfoSec and cyber-related services. So things like they have a thing like Shodan or Census that provides internet survey, and you can query it for devices. And of course, some of those are flagged with vulnerable to particular exploits. Same kind of thing as you get with Shodan. There's also some documents like describing some of the services that they can provide, and you have to kind of read those with a bit of like marketing sales guy grain of salt, right? Because sometimes they're
like the Snowden PowerPoints that leaked from NSA.
Yeah, like sometimes there's things that like are aspirational capabilities or things that they'd like to be able to do or would like to sell but don't quite do. Anyway, it's a little bit hard to read between those lines, especially with the language challenges. But there are documents about, for example, lists of systems in Taiwan and which of those are vulnerable to particular, like, firewall bugs or common, exploits that have been around. There's some information around like their capability of collecting data from various email providers, which covered basically everything in China, and then also Gmail, which was quite interesting. They don't specify how they get their data, whether it's a lawful process, whether it's a technical process, like exactly what it is. But there's some descriptions of capabilities there, and just a few other bits and pieces that people are like, it's not quite clear. Like, for example, there's like Windows Trojan /backdoor/rats, which could be legit services, could be hacker tools, could be both. Kind of difficult to say. So yeah, we don't really know. It doesn't feel exactly like ISOOM, but it's certainly an interesting insight, into these Chinese companies and the ecosystem generally. Someone will have to get hold of the whole tranche and really dig through before we know actually whether it's interesting or just kind of like, workaday info leaks.
Yeah. Is it a pen test company plus Shodan, or is it offering like rats to the MSS? Like, we don't actually know yet. It could be either of those, right? We're just going to have to wait and see. Good news here, though, I guess, is that not for them, but the good news for us is that this data is apparently being sold on like Telegram or something. So someone's going to get their hands on it, and when they do, they'll do that analysis, and we should know a little bit more. Now, talk to me about the apparent breach at the Congressional Budget Office, because we started seeing reports of this last week that they'd had an incident. And now, I guess where it got more interesting is that we've got some subsequent reporting from Politico that says that this is still a live incident, and that people are being told, like, don't click on links in your own emails and whatnot, because people are still, like, in there. Not great, especially during a government shutdown.
Yeah, exactly. We haven't seen much in the way of specifics. Obviously, the shutdown doesn't exactly help that process. It was being reported earlier in the week as though it was like a thing happened and we were investigating and it's under control. Politico today was saying that it's still considered ongoing, and that some other organizations, so for example, Politico saw an email in the Library of Congress where staffers there were told not to interact with the Congressional Budget Office, like not to go on Teams calls with them, not to Zoom meet with them or click on links in their emails. So there's definitely some feeling that it's still, live and ongoing, and maybe they haven't actually contained it yet. And that's obviously not great. Details are just super sketchy, though. It's just, bad stuff is currently happening as opposed to bad stuff did happen. And we will, have to wait and see exactly what that looks like. But, I guess it's not a great time to be a US government employee full stop at the moment. So probably worse if you have to interact with that office.
Yeah, and Lily Hay Newman has a report for Wired, just sort of, there's not much here, but, basically the piece is asking what the result of this shutdown is going to be in terms of security outcomes. I think the vote to reopen has already happened or is about to happen. I can't remember. It all gets a bit lost, but, the government's going to reopen. And the question's really going to be like, how much catch-up is there? So I believe that like a lot of security personnel, they did still work through the shutdown, but you know what it's like. You've worked security jobs. Quite often, as part of your job, you're going to be asking other people to do things. And are those people there? You need to meet with various people from across the organization to actually do your job, and a lot of them aren't going to be there. So I don't think we really know how badly things have atrophied over the last 5 weeks of this US government shutdown. But Yeah, I look. The one point the piece makes is that things have actually got better inside the US government over time, like moving to more cloud-based systems and things like that, and actually some attention being put onto cybersecurity. But yeah, I mean, I think a whole bunch of people are going to come back to work, and then neglect will gradually reveal itself.
Yeah, I think it's hard to judge, but I think the combination of the shutdown and then the kind of wider cuts across the government employee base over this year, it's going to be a pretty rough place because, as you say, you have to interact with other people to get things done. If those people are busy or don't exist anymore because they lost their jobs, getting anything done and getting it done comprehensively, because like you can make security changes, you can have initiatives, etc, but you kind of have to be comprehensive about it. You can't just do it in a little pocket. You kind of have to do it everywhere, and that kind of effective coverage is very difficult when the organizations you're dealing with are compromised by the availability of staff or resources or whatever else. And yeah, we're not going to know for a while what the cuts at CISA meant, what this government shutdown has done. It's going to be a mess, and it's going to take a while to claw back, because everybody's going to be hyper busy when they get back to work. And I'm sure the adversaries will make hay while the sun shines,
Well, they're always trying, right? So
yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
Now, look, staying with the US, and we've seen the appointment of Donald Trump's former bankruptcy lawyer, also the former US ambassador to Israel, being appointed to, what is he? He's the president of the board at NSO or something. And this comes after the NSO Group has been acquired by a group of US investors, which included the movie producer Robert Simons. Look, it seems pretty obvious what's happening here, which is that, David Friedman, who is the former ambassador. Yeah, so he's the executive chairman. Sorry, I'm just looking at it here. We got some good reporting from The Guardian that we've linked through to in this week's show notes. It seems pretty clear what's happening here is US owners are taking over NSO, and it is a matter of time before they're going to move to have the sort of sanctions and entity listings against NSO Group dropped, and they're going to be going after the US market. Now, I think this is depressing in that NSO Group sort of being resurrected from the dead is not what we want to see. I think seeing anyone involved in that enterprise sort of rewarded and legitimized is a bad thing. And you do wonder who's driving this, right? And what the plan is for NSO Group's products under this current administration in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think the original founders are out as of the most recent kind of ownership change. And you can definitely see the path that they're going down, as you say, like a pivot towards being a supplier into the US, law enforcement and national security and other buyers there.
Well, Friedman says that that's his objective, right? He says he wants to take NSO and get it US government contract.
Yeah, and given, they bought it for really tuppence halfpenny, right? There was very, very little compared to what NSO used to be worth. And so I guess they feel like there is still a lot of, latent value that they can claw back and, make bank on that particular purchase. They've just got to navigate this process, and, the kind of level of nepotism that we kind of expect from the US at the moment. It makes sense that, the guy's got the connections to Trump. There is a kind of a path for them to turn this into a real thing, which, as you say, is kind of depressing. On the other hand, the US as a steward of these, I mean, if we accept that these tools are going to be made somewhere and exist somewhere, the US is probably a better place for them to be beholden to, because the US, modulo the recent unpleasantness, basically believes in the regular world order, whereas we see what some of the players that operate outside of those constraints have been doing, like all the places that they've been selling, and NSO in the past have sold to. It's not the worst place for them to land versus like sell it to Russia or, sell it to North Korea or something. Right? There are plenty of places where it could go that would be worse, but it's still not great, as you say, to see people rewarded. And
well, I think given that the original founders and shareholders all sort of got hosed, maybe that's not the worst part of it. I just don't think this admin is going to do particularly responsible things with NSO Group. I did say, I don't know if you saw recently, but the new president of Syria, Ahmed al-Sharaa, actually closed the office of his brother who was trying to profit from the family name. And I did say someone comment on on social media that, you know, it's kind of ironic that the former Al-Qaeda guy seems to be, you know, doing a better job on nepotism than the United States president. So, you know, we do live in fascinating times. But yeah, look, I think broadly speaking, you're right. And look, even in my conversation with that I spoke about last week, the conversation I had with John Scott Railton at Citizen Lab, you know, it really is my opinion that when it comes to spyware, the thing that really matters is the legal controls around it, the legal framework around how it's allowed to be used, you know, what the courts do, what the courts are allowed to do. You know, this is where the rubber meets the road when it comes to spyware. So it's really important that the government of the day is going to be a responsible steward. Now, whether or not that's this current government, I don't know, but the midterm elections are happening in 12 months from now. So I think, you know, what unfurls from this is really going to depend on who wins elections in the United States and who cares about this issue. And it has seemed in the past where there has been some sort of bipartisan concern around this. I think the Biden White House did a pretty good job on this. So, you know, it's all going to come down to who gets elected.
Yeah. One question I had reading this particular story is, what about the injunction by Meta against NSO Group? Like this whole like, let's say they get to the point where they, you know, are back in the US government's good books or whatever. Are they still not? They're still not allowed to target Facebook or WhatsApp or, you know, anything Meta owned because of that particular injunction, which puts them at somewhat of a competitive disadvantage compared to their peers that can sell WhatsApp exploits. So that's,
I don't know. I mean, I think there's ways around that, which is you can sell the exploit and the customer can use it and they've got sovereign immunity. And like there's going to be ways to skin that cat. I don't see that as being the end of NSO. I just think, I'm not on the team that I think that is some crushing blow against them. But they're appealing it anyway. So again, comes down to the courts, comes down to the law, comes down to, you know, to what's allowed. So we'll just we'll have to see. Now, look, staying with the US, and you know, the 2015 CISA, not to be confused with the agency, but the Cybersecurity Information Sharing Act, that lapsed after 10 years. So that lapsed on September 30. Been freakouts from various quarters. Now, this is the law and the framework that allows companies to share data with the government, and for that data not to be used against them in various ways. So it's been a big deal. There hasn't been an immediate cessation of that sharing, right? So that's the good news. But it's also not a tenable situation where people are sharing this information without cover. I think most organizations have been in this sort of wait and see holding pattern with it. Which is all well and good until it drags on a little bit too long, or something bad happens, or there's some government action, or, you know. So now it looks like that law is going to go through with the reopening of the government. It's going to get kicked down the road till about January 30. And there's a bit of an argument between the Dems and the Republicans as to whether or not they just do a, you know, clean reauthorization of that bill, or whether they actually whack some additional stuff in there. One thing that some people want to go in there is immunity for people who've shared this information while the bill has lapsed, but it looks like it's going to get worked out. And thank God for that, because, you know, I've had a lot of people in my ear about this over the last month or two saying that really, if this thing goes away, it's a very big problem.
Yeah. There's been a lot of kind of conversation about it and quite how important it has been. And, you know, it's funny how these things end up kind of casualties of the wider, you know, political situation, right? I mean, this will end up being temporarily reauthorized, we presume, you know, with the government restart, but it shouldn't have to be tied to that. Like, they should be able to have a functional democratic process that results in this being reauthorized in the normal way instead of lurching through with everything else. But it is, you know, it does seem to have been a particularly important thing. And, you know, I think at the moment there is some kind of somewhat bipartisan support for extending it properly. Like, there's a few people holding out because, you know, there's been, you know, lots of concerns around kind of weaponizing these relationships, you know, with the private sector by the government in, you know, one way or the other. But this is, you know, it was a dumb thing to throw out with the bathwater, and I'm glad that, you know, even if it's temporary, it's going to be moving onwards, and presumably they will get it right eventually.
Yeah, that's it. Now, we've got a report from Kevin Collier here, who has, it's a good report actually, because he's noticed that in the Bank of England's, you know, economic update, it even mentions the ransomware attack against Jaguar Land Rover. It says, what do we got here? Headline GDP growth has remained slightly higher than estimates of underlying growth over recent quarters, blah, 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 blah. Headline GDP is projected to have grown by 0.2% in Q3, a little less than expected in the August report. That reflects weaker than expected growth in exports to the US, as well as disruption linked to the Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack. So that's really interesting when you've got a central bank in a major economy saying, this ransomware attack actually weighed on growth. I mean, that means that ransomware attack has measurably impacted the economy and thus measurably impacted the quality of life of Britons, which is nuts.
Yeah, I mean, there's one comparison that Collier makes, which was that it's more impact than WannaCry had. We remember what WannaCry was like at the time. It was wild watching that bug go crazy across the internet and knock all sorts of stuff offline. And so this particular ransomware attack making a bigger impact, like what was it, $2.5 billion worth of impact to the UK economy at Jaguar Land Rover, like that's significant. And it does kind of also, makes me think about the kids that did this, like are mostly, British or at least English speaking, like I wouldn't want to be them. Like they may well have caught the, being the dog that, catches the car kind of thing, because they're, it's going to take law enforcement a while to untangle all of that comm mess, but they're going to get there. And these guys are going to be looking at, taking the rap for the Bank of England saying the GDP is down because of them. That's not going to be good for your prosecution.
That doesn't look good when you're in court getting sentenced, when you've got the, the head of the Reserve Bank of England saying this guy just hurt the economy.
Yeah, it's not good. It's not going to reflect well.
Good. What else have we got here? We've got Sonic Wall saying that those attacks against their sort of cloud config backup thing, this is when they were getting brute forced and didn't notice because they weren't doing any brute force detection, which is, malpractice if I'm, expressing my true opinion on that. They've now said that was a state-backed actor who did that. I don't think they've said who it was, but yeah, I mean, no surprise there, really. I mean, look, smells like China, let's be honest.
It does smell that way. I mean, it could be North Korea, I suppose, but it does kind of smell like China.
North Korea going after Sonic walls. I mean, how many crypto exchanges are using? It doesn't, no.
It doesn't, yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, who would be behind it and do a good job, right? I mean, it's kind of a short list.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about this Sonic Wall thing, right? So they've said that it was probably a nation-state actor. When they originally reported it, they mentioned brute forcing as a vector. And it did seem, and they said like, 5% of our customers. And that felt like plausibly brute forcing. But I think that they don't seem to be doubling down on the brute forcing angle. I think that there is another avenue, because like the fact that it went to 100% of customers, they got all of the backups, does not feel like account brute force. That feels like there was a bug in the platform and that they originally spotted, they were looking for something that was explaining these things getting nicked, saw brute force attempts in their logs, pulled that particular thread that led to the 5% number. That's kind of how it feels to me. There isn't anything that kind of substantiates this, except that brute force of 100% of customers does not ring true. Right, so
Adam vibes. I mean, maybe they brute forced a privileged account,
or privileged or something. Like, it's possible, but like it feels like there was a bug in the platform, and that resulted in all of the backups getting stolen, and then of course credential material from there and onwards to great victory. But yeah, either way, nation state behind it totally makes sense. China makes sense. If you have a Sonic Wall, they've actually provided some better guidance on like how to deal with this, where you put in like the serial numbers of your Sonic Walls, and they will tell you whether or not those configs have been stolen and what you should do about it based on the exposure of various services on the firewall. So they've done them, as good a job as they could in dealing with this after the fact, but would be better if they hadn't had all of their configs stolen in the first place.
Now let's talk about Japan and the Nikkei, the media giant Nikkei. I'm guessing, do they operate the exchange? I don't know. I don't even know. But yeah, it owns the Financial Times and publishes a bunch of financial newspapers, employs a bunch of people. Their Slack got owned and it exposed data on 17,000 people. This is a piece from Darina Antonyuk over at The Record. And I guess the thing that makes this interesting is I still feel like a lot of organizations, they don't really think enough about what an exposure of something like Slack actually means for them. And this is just a good example of like, wow, okay, that's bad.
Yeah, because this particular breach got into their Slack, having stolen login credentials, I assume like InfoStealer, onwards from there, includes chat histories for 17,000 users. Like, it's one thing to get names and email addresses, like that's not a great data breach. Chat histories at a news organization, like I feel like that's probably a thing that is not ideal. And I guess the benefit is that stuff ages relatively quickly. So like in terms of profiting off financial reporting ahead of the market or something like that. That stuff doesn't last particularly long. But I'm sure there is a great many juicy and interesting things in all those chat logs. And at the very least, some memes, right? Because, if someone got all of your, if someone stole our Slack history, for example, there would at least be some funny, some funny japes and stuff. So that would be nice. But yeah,
there'd be some scuttlebutt. We do talk about stuff. We talk about stuff in Slack where it's like, high quality rumor that you can't really report, or stuff sources have said and they've asked you not to talk about it publicly. And like, there's stuff there.
Yeah.
I mean, media is always a great target for intelligence collection, because they are at the front line meeting with sources and collecting a lot of stuff, and often they don't publish it. We don't know that that's what this is. Who knows? But, it's just that exposure, like, the number of secrets as well that you can pull out of Slack. Like, we've seen that a million times, like API keys, cred pairs, all sorts of stuff in Slacks. It's just, and it's one of those typical SaaS services where you don't control it. You don't control it, and people are using it to do sensitive stuff. And I just think this is a good example. I don't think this Nikkei company, which operates which owns the Financial Times and a bunch of financial newspapers, I don't know that they operate the exchange. Probably not. Anyway, someone will yell at me. They always do. Tell me what I got wrong. We'll talk about that in a minute too. What else have we got here? Now, we got a story from Catalan found this one where Intel has sued a former employee for stealing a bunch of confidential data. It is the means of theft, Adam, that you think is particularly lol-worthy. So walk us through it.
Yeah, so this guy had worked at Intel in a design engineering role in Seattle, I think, for 14 years. He found out he was going to be terminated. He decided that maybe he would loot some confidential documents from Intel to help him out the door, whether for a future employer, whether he was planning on selling them, who knows. He decided to do the obvious thing, which is you plug a USB stick into your computer and you copy all the files over to it. Now, Intel, being a sensible, cyber-enabled, security-conscious organization, had put controls in place, presumably at great cost, on desktop use of USB storage devices, maybe some DLP, whatever it was, whatever technology was. It snapped this guy attempting to copy the data, and so good job, security controls. Everything worked as intended. So to get around that, he just brought a NAS in and plugged it into the network and copied it to that instead. So, good lateral thinking. Got the job done. Unfortunately, they found out what was going on overall. But, I just feel bad for the people that had to work such a long time getting USB controls in place and then circumvented by plug in NAS, copy data to there instead. Womp, womp.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how it goes, right? Which is, insider threat is hard, and it doesn't take much to sidestep a lot of controls in practice. Although, I mean, he did get caught, right? And I'm guessing there's some nice juicy network logs there to help with the prosecution. Now, let's take a look at the OWASP Top 10, Adam, because they've updated it. And by and large, I feel like this update, it's not the first time we've said this when they've updated it in the past. This update feels like progress, because when you see what's on the top 10 now, it's less and less dumb stuff. Like, it's still dumb stuff, but it's like not the dumb stuff that we were used to dealing with. I kind of feel it's good that we're dealing with different dumb stuff now. I don't know. Less ubiquitous dumb stuff, which is cool. But walk us through OWASP's new top 10.
So this is the release candidate, so they may still tweak it before the final, but I feel like at this point it's pretty locked in. So number one is still broken access control, and that's a category that covers all manner of kind of logic flaws around access control, things like direct object reference, etc. And that remains number one, which is, I think, an entirely reasonable thing, reasonable thing to be number one.
Would something like PHP file include fall under broken access control, or?
Probably not, although these categories are a little bit, kind of flexible. And I think quite a lot of the OWASP top 10, when they arrange, the numbers and the categories and stuff, there is quite a bit of massaging because they want a top 10 that covers most of the things that need to be covered, because many project managers and business owners and whatever aren't going to fix things that aren't, like top 10 bugs, because it doesn't seem like, if you're not fixing things in the top 10, then you're negligent. So there's quite a bit of sort of massaging to make things fit the way we need them to. The list is, there's a bit of wiggle room, I guess, in how they categorize things.
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking, the reason I asked that is because when I think about a PHP file include, I can see like 4 categories or something here on the top 10 that it fits into, right? So
so there's, they try and map these onto CWE, common weakness enumeration kind of categories. And there's sort of a bit of flexi about some things are like symptoms and some things are like root causes. But the main thing is to give developers and security people some ammunition to use to say, we actually need to fix this because it's a top 10 bug. And so how they, finagle the list to support that is indeed part of the process. Although this is it's not just finger in the air. They do, collect a bunch of data, from application security firms and from developers and whatever code review places to kind of substantiate this. But there's a little bit of working backwards from what we want.
Well, it's impossible to build a simple taxonomy, as evidenced by the fact that server-side request forgery is now part of broken access control. So, they folded that into that category. But look, I guess it's just like you used to look at the top 10 and it was all real facepalm dumb stuff. And it's like, it's more nuanced now. It's a little bit more sophisticated. So I feel like that's good.
Yeah. So broken access control number 1, security misconfigurations is up in number 2, which kind of makes sense. It was a bit lower in the previous one. There is a new one which kind of subsumes a previous category, which is software supply chain failures. And that's one of the big changes here, because we have seen so much focus on compromise of upstream packages, of very complex dependency trees, of software backdoors and supply chain attacks, pivoting through credentials and things, that this is a thing that absolutely deserves to be higher up and kind of more highlighted in the list. And I think of all of the changes this year, that's probably the big one, is focusing on supply chain and how people are going to address that. Because, especially in ecosystems that pull packages in very, rapidly, things like the JavaScript ecosystem, where there is dynamic composure of software very close to runtime, as opposed to kind of at build time or earlier on in the kind of life cycle of software development. So it makes sense for this to be a thing that people are focusing on. So that's great. They've collapsed down some other categories as well, and kind of rearrange them. Cryptographic failures have gone down a little bit, which I think is probably reflective of the fact that there's slightly less, crypto junk with, block shuffling of AES ciphers and things, because that kind of bug class has been pretty hammered out by Microsoft and .NET and by bug bounty kids and so on. So there's a little bit of wiggling, but that's software supply chain is, I think, the big change for me. There is one other new entry, which is mishandling of exceptional conditions, which, error handling is a thing that we should get right. I guess it wasn't explicitly in the top 10 before. Now it is, and that's good. But everything else pretty much kind of how it was, have good logging.
So you're saying, what's this luxury doing in the top 10?
Well, but I think that's, to your point, I think that is also kind of progress, right? The fact that we have, logging and alerting and mishandling of exceptional conditions have made it into the top 10 is a recognition that we are overall getting better, but also that, previously we would have had separate entries in this list for cross-site scripting, for SQL injection, for server-side request forgery, for, local file include, whatever. Like, those were broken out previously. The list is better organized now, and we've made room for more, more important things, because we've kind of collapsed the categories a bit. And I think, overall, I'm really here for this. I think the OWASP, the team that managed the top 10, do a really good job of massaging it into exactly kind of what it needs to be, even if it means a little bit of weaseling about, server-side request forgery can just kind of go up into, access control or whatever it is. Because the outcome we need, they get there one way or the other, and good work and good job to them.
All right. Now, that's actually mostly it for the week's news, but we're going to do a bit of a follow-up conversation just quickly. Last week, of course, we spoke about the FFmpeg Google spat. Funnily enough, both you and I have been chatting to people from Google. We're not going to name names, but you've spoken to someone at Google. I've spoken to someone at Google. I had a pretty negative. Our comments got a bit of a negative reception with the person that I spoke to, who was like, "Look, we spend a lot of money with FFmpeg Labs, which is sort of the commercial arm of FFmpeg. We've contributed through Summer of Code, like we've helped them a lot." I think all of that's true. I don't think that changes really my position on this, which is it's time to have a conversation about the norms involved in reporting software bugs, particularly to open source projects. And, this 90s era codec where the bug was that we were talking about, like that's not really part that's being commercially maintained based on contracts with Google. Like it's just, I just think I still maintain that it's time to have a conversation about this. Yeah, I've even seen a bug finder on social media saying, "Well, I just submitted a pull request with my with my bug after everything that's happened this week," and I think that turning that into a bit of a norm is not the worst. But you had a conversation with someone who's quite senior at Google as well, and they seemed more receptive to our position on that. So I think opinion seems to be split everywhere on this.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of these things can be true. Like Google absolutely can contribute and has contributed to the wider FFmpeg, and obviously, have a lot of people that write good code and contribute code to open source projects. But at the same time, disclosure has always been a real kind of like, it's a thing that always kind of riles up the community because it's such a nuanced, kind of complicated set of, trade-offs that we have to all make, and there are different answers to all of these questions depending on your perspectives and so on. So I think, it is nuance. And I think, if anything, Google understands that nuance. Like Google has a depth of engineering knowledge and relationships with these communities, and all the people involved do understand all of these complexities. Sometimes, there are kind of blunt, reporting bugs that came out of your AI is can be kind of a blunt process. And as you say, like we're heading towards the point where they'll be able to submit code fixes in that kind of scaled way that we're talking about. But, overall it's, this stuff is complicated. And I think, getting to the point where at least showing up with a, like here's a bug I found, and here's at least an attempt at like how we could fix it or some suggestions.
It doesn't. I mean, that's literally about was what I was about to say, which is you don't. It's not going to be possible for a bug hunter to submit a patch every time because they might not entirely understand how the software works, right? Like they've figured out a bug, however they've done it, and they don't understand the context in that code to be able to make a fix without breaking something or whatever. But at least trying to be more constructive about it, which is like, here's how far I got. Here's what I think, but like, who's the developer? Like, let's have a call. I just think we need to move to a more collaborative model, basically.
But at least trying is a demonstration of good faith. And like,
yes,
if I'm reporting a bug to Oracle, I don't feel like I need to demonstrate good faith then because probably I don't have good faith with Oracle.
There's a difference between, hey, look, I think I found a security bug here and I'd like to work with you on fixing it. Let's have a chat, versus here's a bug, here's a POC, you got 90 days or I'm going to full disk it and screw you. That's the difference.
Yeah. And like there are plenty of people in the hacker community that are kind of from that, screw software developers, but that was born of an era where Microsoft wouldn't fix really severe bugs in like IIS or Internet Explorer, right? Unless you put the screws on them. They would just sit on bugs for a year. They would never fix them. So like that came from somewhere. And it makes sense. And I still think it makes sense to turn the screws on a bunch of these little large companies that need to be doing better. But we just need to be a little bit more intelligent about it. Anyway, we've spent enough time on that. The other thing I wanted to quickly mention as well, just a little bit of subsequent reporting on the Peter Williams trenchant leak situation, is I have it from two sources now that one of the bugs that he stole and sold to a Russian exploit broker was used by North Koreans, which is, it's not been reported anywhere. I figure it's probably going to come out, more officially than just people telling me. And just, it really puts this thing into context, which is like how bad it is, what he did, like how appalling his actions were, and why I find it just insane that he's not even going to do as much time as a ransomware affiliate. Although, let's see if his sentence is surprising to the upside in January when he actually
when it gets handed down.
Yeah, I mean, when we started to see that kind of scuttlebutt, it does make you think, what did you think was going to happen when you sold these bugs? Where did you think they were going to go? You know, and the fact they would end up, you know, not just in Russian hands, but like in North Korea's, like it's, what did you? I mean, I guess that's a number of people I've talked to are like, what did you think was going to happen? How did you think this? Why did you think this was a plan that was going to work for you? And let's really hope that it does not work well for him, because we'll see what the sentencing looks like, eh?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is he hit like acute money trouble. And when you look at when his activity started, it was when interest rates went up, the crypto economy like collapsed, equities did badly as well. Like, 2022 was a time when a lot of people got into money problems. This is a married guy with kids, he's probably worried about his family situation and whatever, but out of the frying pan and into the fire is what this guy did. Just epically, epically dumb. He might even be listening to this. From what I understand, he was actually a Risky Business listener. So, Peter, you're a knob. You're an idiot. And you deserve everything you get, I'm afraid. Adam, that is it for this week's news. Big thanks to you for joining me, and we'll do it all again next week.
Yeah, thanks so much, Pat. I will talk to you then.
That was Adam Boileau there with a check of the week's security news. Big thanks to him for that. It is time for this week's sponsor interview now with Haroon Mir, who is the founder and, big cheese over at Things to Canary. Things to Canary obviously makes hardware honeypots that you can just plug into your network and they can mimic whatever you want them to be. So if someone is on your network poking around, you're going to get a very high fidelity signal that tells you someone's poking around on your network. As you'll hear, they've got a bunch of sort of cloud-based canaries these days as well, because it is 2025. But Haroon joined me for this conversation really about how we should be demanding better from security, vendors, companies that make security products. And it isn't the usual just ranting about how we deserve better. He's talking specifically about how Things to Canary has a /security page, which you can go visit right now, canary.tools/security. Go have a look at the /security page, and you'll see that it's a very simple discussion, a very simple list, really, of the security measures that that Things puts in place, how they think about their product, what can happen if there are breaches, I guess, at Thingst, and like what they've done to wall people off and prevent things turning into a disaster. Just really simple stuff. And Haroon's point here is, shouldn't everybody do that? And I think he's absolutely right. So here's Haroon Mir.
Like, part of the reason we have this page, like we have canary.tools/security, is hey, listen, here's how we think about this product. Like, we're going to do some dangerous things. You're going to trust this box on your network. What security questions should you have about this device? And let us try to assuage you that actually this is not a terrible idea. And I think that all security vendors should be putting forward some of that. Like, customers should be demanding some of that. Hey, you're going to be doing this dangerous in-kernel thing. Show us that you're considering eBPF instead of just raw dogging the kernel. You're going to be doing this stuff on our network. Show us that when you get owned, you're not going to also end up owning us just because of splash damage. And I think all of the answers are going to be different. I think, and one of the things that frustrate me is that you don't see signs of this sort of thinking or innovation coming out in the security space, in part because people don't demand it. What you should be seeing is someone with deep pockets, like someone like Fortinet, someone like Palo Alto, coming out and saying, we've got a bajillion lines of code to audit, and that's why this is our code scanning solution. This is our SAST solution. But you don't see innovation in those spaces being talked about because they don't have to. It's like, yes, there is this risk that they know they're carrying, but they can just ignore it because instead they're going to talk about the next thing that the market cares about. So they're going to buy the next agentic thing, and before that they bought the next SOAR thing, and before that they bought the next. But fundamentally, people need to be saying, hey, you've got a lot of code. How are you auditing this code? Take anyone who runs modern SAST, modern code scanners. They've got the same problems that code scanners had since forever. And so Cisco and Palo Alto and all of these guys should be putting out white papers saying, when you have as much code as we have, this is what we're doing. This is how we're getting there. And you'll notice for our stuff, it's very us related. It's, we got to run 3,000 Nginx instances. How have we customized Nginx to not surprise us? We've got to do stuff.
I've noticed actually that on your, /security page, like you look at a lot of this and some of it's like, oh, okay, we're using memsafe languages and whatever, but a lot of it is just sort of architectural. You know what I mean? It's like we've chosen to deploy this way for this reason and, it all makes sense, but it is very specific to you.
No, absolutely. And I'm saying everyone should have stuff that's specific to them for exactly this reason. And what you see,
but how does that work when it's like a domain joined like remote access appliance? You know what I mean? You can't re-architect that such that it's no longer a domain joined edge device, right? Like that's always going to be an architectural problem.
Yeah. So there are some things that can't be done safely, and then those people need to be saying, for you to trust me to do this safely, here's my duty of care. And what we slip into without that is, trust me, bro. And instead, like you take take Adam, and Adam will tell you, of course we were gonna pop that thing. And Adam knows it, and every attacker knows it, and everyone else is just acting like that's not the case. And that's just insane for places where it matters. And instead, the company should feel under pressure to say, if we're gonna do this domain joined edge thing, then we need to show that we've had it audited by the absolute best, because otherwise you shouldn't trust us with this thing. And so, like, our /security really comes from the place that says, why would you trust us with this thing? Look, it's because we're thinking about this. And what I want to see more from other vendors, and what I want to see customers demanding, is exactly that sort of accountability. And way back,
what's crazy, Haroon, right? Is, I work with a bunch of startups now, and all of them get security testing, and it's because often people procuring newer technologies, they demand a pen test. You know what I mean? They want to know that you've been through like a rigorous audit. Like, Knock Knock is a great example where commissioned a test, really good tester actually, based out of Australia, testing company. They found a couple of things too, which were definitely worth fixing, but then you get to package up the report and like customers can look at it. What's amazing is how much this type of material is demanded from startups. But meanwhile, they'll throw a couple of $1 million at a few, pan devices that are like, Linux on MIPS with no like memory corruption mitigations or controls, and like no pen test report needed. That's fine. You guys have been around for a while. It seems a bit backwards.
It's exactly the reverse assumption, right? You think that they're big enough and they must be okay. And also, like, can you really ask them for that sort of stuff? But it's absolutely what we should be doing. And I must say, also for the smaller startups, you'll see them slip in two ways. They'll do the pen tests, but when you're a young startup, you're going to have this problem of, it's a normal technical debt thing, right? You're racing for income, you're racing for features, and you start to make your architecture choices then. And my thing is, we've always known that we genuinely have to be accountable for our choices. Till today, we don't heavily play in Active Directory deception because we don't know how to do it safely. Like the times we've done it, we ended up with, yes, we can own this, and there's no way we can not own this. And so we don't release that because we're not going to get people's networks owned that way. And what you see is the reverse, where like, I've spoken to other people, other vendors, and I go like, how are you doing that securely? And there's a shrug.
Well, it's like, it's like when I talk to HD Moore about how Run Zero is, a terrific scanner that is unauthenticated, right? And he's figured out how to make unauthenticated scanning work really well. And the reason for that is, like, anyone who's done pen testing knows that a great way to collect privileged credentials is to just pop up on the network and wait for the vulnerability scanner to pass off a bunch of highly privileged credentials to you, thinking that you are a device to be scanned, you know? And it's like, you can't fix that. You just can't fix that, and it's dumb, and we shouldn't be using that shit anymore.
Yeah, and I'll take it a step further. We shouldn't be introducing those things. And you will still see a ton of security products still introducing security badness. And my thing is, because they get away by having their SOC 2 report. And a SOC 2 report, like we all know,
hey, but they're FedRAMP. It's fine. It's fine.
Exactly. And so I'm saying what people should have is a /secure page like this that at least says, here's the things we think you should be thinking about. Here's the things we thought about. Here's why you should listen to us. And like this stuff keeps changing. Like we write about some of them pretty currently. But yeah, I think it's a mistake for people not to. Increasingly, I push back to people to say, let's go read their blog. You can read the Run Zero blog and you can see HD's thoughts on the industry. You can come see our blog, and other than our new features, you'll see here's the stuff we're doing to keep our infrastructure safe, so that when we get popped like F5 did, you'll hopefully hear about it before the 2 years are up and all our source code is gone. And mostly that just doesn't exist for people because the market's not demanding it. And when we did the Products We Deserve talk, I said that good customers need to push back, because lots of times good customers know that they're hearing vendor BS and they ignore it. But the problem is younger customers don't know that stuff. And so it's the responsibility of smart customers with well-funded teams to push back and say, actually, this is garbage and you guys shouldn't be doing it. And then hopefully that stuff will get better.
I mean, like, it's funny talking about this because it's been my approach for years that the stuff that I'm interested in from a, security products point of view, and these days kind of as a, part-time, venture investor, which is part of my job now, the stuff that I'm really interested in is what I would describe as enduring controls, right? And the great thing about enduring controls is they tend to be a lot simpler than the stuff that is getting owned sideways these days. So I think about stuff like Airlock Digital, which is allow listing and, very simply constructed, but, makes allow listing simple, scales up to, I think they've got clients with like 150,000 endpoints in one console, like pretty amazing stuff. But it's simple stuff. There's no heaps of parsers and they don't have a team of researchers who are playing whack-a-mole with different classes of attacks. It's just this enduring control that is going to work as well in 10 years from now as it does today. And the attack surface is not really there. Then you've got other stuff like Knock Knock is a good example. Very similar approach. It's allow listing, but it's for network connections. Again, an enduring control. Your stuff, honeypot-based detection and sort of incident alerts. Again, it's an enduring control. And in fact, more enduring now because you've launched a bunch of new stuff that we're going to talk about in just a second. But you see what I'm saying, right? Where I feel like when you're dealing with the stuff that's not an enduring control, when it's like stuff that it's never gonna be good. I don't know. I just am not at all hopeful that it's going to be good. Ever.
No, I think we've quoted it before on the show. Like, the thing that says, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long one. Like that also applies to like good product design, right? Like if you can whittle it down to here's the thing that it does, we do this one thing, then it doesn't become let me throw the kitchen sink at it. It's here's what we do. We're going to make sure we can do it cleanly and we're going to make sure we can do it well. And the alternative to that is let me grab every buzzword that we can. Let me shove it down because maybe this ticks some of your boxes when you're trying to do your acquisition or your purchase. And
well, what is F5? It's a load balancer firewall WAF.
Okay.
It's an SSL termination load balancing firewall WAF.
And that stuff happens a lot. And I'll tell you to a bigger thing that you mentioned. Like for the last while, like we went through this 15-year hysteria of everybody starting a company and everyone's getting acquired and everyone's selling their company. And you end up with this horrible place where people are, like the intention is to make a company and then sell the company. And like what you'll see if you speak to the airlock guys, if you speak to HD, if you speak to Knock Knock, fundamentally I want to build a meaningful thing. And like if you're building a useful thing, you get a bunch of people who feel they're doing like great work in building that thing. And then you actually care about, can I do it securely? Can this thing not own my customer network?
Well, but I think it's those two are kind of related. Like the reason it is an enduring thing, it's a fundamental control. And the thing about fundamental controls is they tend to be quite simple. So they are easier to build securely, which again is why I like them, you know?
Yeah, I think you'll bump into, like when we gave the talk, I spoke about why people stay away from building simple things. And there's a bunch of reasons that simple is hard. But I think that's maybe a soapbox issue for us to
yeah, that's a longer conversation. Speaking of, we're kind of running out of time here. So you've also put out a platform update for Things Canary. What have you shipped?
Yeah, so this month we shipped 2 new platforms. So for us Canaries, you'll remember the original versions were just the hardware devices, still by far our biggest seller. So literally thousands of them. Famously, we always talk about hardware devices in Antarctica, so sitting in the snow. But soon after that, we released VMware versions, Hyper-V versions, AWS versions, GCP versions. But all of them logically are the same. So if you've got this environment, you boot them up. A Canary is now in that environment. And we've got them on Docker. We've got them in Tailscale. So for people who like Tailscale, you can just click a button and a Canary shows up in your Tailscale network. And this month, we released them for Oracle Cloud Infrastructure and Nutanix. So again, people who've got those sort of setups, you now have the option where you can drop a bird in. Again, just works, shows up in your console, and you're good to go.
Excellent. Now, the Antarctica one, is that the Australia-based guy from the Antarctic Authority or whatever, the Antarctic Division?
I'm not sure I can say that.
Oh, that's all right, because I met that guy. I met the security guy for the Antarctic Division or whatever it's called at like OSCERT like 15 years ago, and he gave me a pin, and he was a really cool guy. So hello to you. If you're listening, I've still got the pin around somewhere.
I have to say, we now have 2 customers in Antarctica. So one of them might have been that, and we now have 2. But it is one of the things I love most in my life. Like if you tell me that you'd take something away from me and I'd be very sad, being able to say we're on all 7 continents is one of them. I love our Antarctica customers.
Yep. Got to look after those penguins. All right, Haroon Mir, thank you so much for joining me for that conversation. Great stuff as always.
Always cool, Pat.
That was Haroon Mir from Things to Canary there with this week's sponsor interview. Big thanks to him for that. And that is it for this week's show. I do hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back next week with more security news and analysis. But until then, I've been Patrick Gray. Thanks for listening.